Member Gunther?
Here.
Member Uchek? Member Sturman?
Here.
Member Holthouse? Member Tripp? Member Rambo?
Here.
Member Archesky?
Here.
Councilmember Grignani?
Here.
Councilmember Edens?
Here.
Councilmember Remy?
Here.
Councilmember Farmer? Councilmember McCutcheon?
Here.
Sorry, I'm gonna use that as that one now. Councilmember Vogt, Councilmember McEwen, and Councilmember Garitano.
Thank you. I don't really have any opening remarks. Do you have anything?
No, we're gonna try to get through this stuff tonight as quick as possible because we know the weather's not been so hot out.
So if everybody had a chance to look at the minutes, need a motion for approval of the minutes? Okay. Councilman McCutcheon, the motion, second by Councilmember Stevens.
Thank you.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any absentee?
Can we-
Two abstain. And one abstention.
Who was that?
Councilman Remy.
Thank you.
I have a point of order.
Okay.
Can we even vote on the minutes since we don't have a quorum, do we?
You have 15 people.
Well, it's technically 16, and then
We need 9.
Do you have to count the vacancy?
We need 9, right, Pat?
technically,
We only have 15 appointed, but we
Yeah,
have a
really.
16-member
we
committee.
really can't vote.
For the minutes, though, I believe it's the majority here.
Majority.
Okay.
So,
So that's the only vote we can do tonight. That's the only vote we can actually do tonight.
Currently,
Yes.
unless somebody else shows up.
Councilmember Farmer's in traffic, so 21 minutes out.
Do you have any public comment cards, or we're just going to ask for,
I have one.
okay?
Russ Rosner.
Mr. Roster, if you want to come up and
What time?
Where, anywhere?
anywhere, that's fine, right there.
I was saving it. Good. Thank you. You didn't know you were saving it for me. Well, this is my first time at this meeting. I've been wanting to come to them, but haven't been able to for different reasons. So I don't know what everybody's talked about already, but not so much where I live on Wild Horse Creek, but a historical farm that I have where the old stone Bethel Church is. Some are familiar with here. It's a particularly flat stretch of creek bed right through there. So consequently, the gravel and the silt builds up, probably more so than a lot of the areas through that watershed. And basically, the Wild Horse Creek Road has become Wild Horse Creek. So it seems pretty clear that, you know, once again, the gravels in the creek bed, the gravel bars, and the silt throughout the wooded area where a lot of the box elders are and that has just built up quite a bit higher than the road. And so then we get the water out on the road on everybody trying to get through and trying to keep fences up, entrances and so forth. So that's it in the short. I'll just share what an old timer told me about 20 years ago, and that's Don Yeager. Some of you probably know that name, Don and Millie Yeager, that lived, and actually he was born and raised in that log cabin that has siding on it. You can't tell it's a log cabin now, but it's right at Wild Horse and Ossenfort, right down there where the valley is, yeah. And he said, back in my day, if a person owned a stretch of creek and they didn't keep it cleaned out of gravel bars and silt and, you know, trees and whatever else came about the creek, they were tarred and feathered. So there's some words from an old timer. Anyway, it's pretty simple to me that, you know, gravity and erosion causes the collection of these watersheds to fill up. We've gone in through permits with, I guess originally it was the Corps of Engineers some 25 years ago, and then it was DNR and the city of Wildwood once they incorporated in '95, and taken out gravel bars on our property and in another location on 109, and also some other people's property on Wild Horse Creek. So kind of used to doing it. it's a simple thing, but a delicate thing. You know, you want to take care of the creek banks and the trees that are doing you good along that way. So anyway, without a lot of detail on that, but so it's kind of something I've done through necessity, and happen to have the equipment to handle that. And quite frankly, have made good use of the creek rock that have come out of these gravel bars. So that's about all I've got.
Good, thank you. Anyone else in the audience have anything?
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
You've done some excavation there by Bethel, by the old Bethel Church,
Not
right?
there, because that stretch of creek is in Babbler Park, actually.
Here's why I'm asking. When I was a kid,
Yeah,
I'm going to say in the 60s, there was a pipeline that broke, an oil pipeline that broke and spewed all kinds of oil in the creek. And I was wondering, a lot of times the cleanup is cosmetic, but you dig down and there's oil forever. And I was wondering if you had hit any, oil along that creek. But it sounds like you're not digging there.
never in, and I'm familiar with that pipeline. It runs through the 36 acres where I live, about 2 miles east of there on Wild Horse Creek.
Okay, yeah.
So I know to be careful around that. Yeah, with what the pipeline people have told me, when they do have a spill, they release some kind of natural organisms that basically, supposedly, according to the oil line
Right.
people, I'm not a scientist, eat this.
Cigarettes don't cause cancer.
No, of course not. Eat this oil up. I don't know, it sounds bizarre to me, but I'm not the scientist in the room, so.
Sorry, thank you.
That's okay. But, no, I should have clarified on that, because I would have loved to have done that, but I never did approach the park or with that, which, it'd be the park and the city both, and DNR, I think, handles the creeks issuing these gravel bar permits, but they're always glad to get the gravel bars out of there. And I know the piece that we have over on 109 by BA down in the Bonham Creek Valley, State Highway Department, they always give the thumbs up when they're going by and we're in there taking the gravel out, because it keeps their bridge open. That is 109 over Bonham Creek right there. So, yeah, again, it's a simple thing, but a delicate process, So,
All right, thank you. Joe, you want to do the presentation of the presenting of the MSD?
Well, actually, Miss Arnett did all the
Okay.
arrangements, so if she wouldn't mind,
Okay.
I would defer to her.
I would be happy to, although I spoke mostly with Rebecca Losley, who is not here this evening, so I'm going to allow these three individuals from MSD to introduce themselves. But, at the November meeting, or November meeting, you all requested, had a lot of questions about MSD and their work in the community and their projects and things that were questions that obviously we could not answer. So at your direction, we reached out to their planning team and got these wonderful individuals. We sent them about 6 questions that were what we had discussed and what had come up. And so I believe what their plan is to do is to kind of go through each question, provide their answer, and then have a little conversation. And so I'm going to turn it over to them. Thank you all for coming. We appreciate it.
Oh, thank you for inviting us. We appreciate that. My name is Saad Amir. I work in the Public Affairs Division in Government Relations.
And I'm Bess McCoy, also in Public Affairs.
And I'm Jeff Reapy, and I work, for Rebecca, so apologize for her not being able to make it today. She is the program manager in our planning department, and I lead our stormwater team in that group.
So Rebecca couldn't make it. Instead, the 3 of us had to come and take her place. But so, like Kathy mentioned, we have the questions that you all sent us. We're ready to talk about those. But we did want to make this more of a discussion. So if you have questions as we're talking, please let us know. We're happy to make it more of a discussion. I did want to start just by giving a little bit of an overview of who we are and what we do, and make sure we're kind of all on the same page. So MSD, we are a wastewater and stormwater utility here in the St. Louis region. Our service area is St. Louis City, all of St. Louis City, and about 90% of St. Louis County. So more or less, we have the Missouri River to the north, Merrimack to the south, and 109 to the west are our boundaries. We, in that area, have over 9,000 miles of sewer that we maintain, sewer pipes. And to put that in perspective, that makes us the 4th largest sewer system in the United States. So definitely up there. The most important thing, though, is we are 2 utilities in one. So we're a wastewater utility, which basically means that we take all of the used water from homes, businesses, treat it, clean it, and then put it back into the environment. And then we're also a stormwater utility, and what that means is that we own and maintain the public storm sewer system. Now, the reason I really want to mention that is because being 2 utilities in one, that also means that we have 2 separate funding sources for both of those services, and those funding sources can't be crossed over. So what we raise for wastewater has to be spent on wastewater stuff, and what we raise for stormwater has to be spent on stormwater. On the wastewater side, I'm happy to say that we are fully funded, and what that means is we can operate and maintain our built system right now, so we can keep it clean, we can make sure it's functioning correctly, and then we can also do capital improvements. So we can construct new sewers where they're needed, or build bigger sewers, make improvements to problems that we see. On the stormwater side, we are not fully funded. So we have funding for the operation and the maintenance side. So basically, we can clean our storm sewers, make sure that the ones that are in place are working. If they break, we can repair them. But we do not have a funding source for the capital improvement side. So as new problems arise because of stormwater, we cannot build, we cannot design new improvements for those issues. Now we do have the authority to do that under our, our guidelines, but because we don't have funding, it's just not something that we're able to provide. Now, we know it's a big problem, and we also know that we're probably in the best position to help alleviate that. So actually, this past April, I don't know if you remember, Proposition S was on the ballot. That would have provided a funding source for those capital improvements. The voters rejected it, though, by a margin of 47 to 53%. So, we listened to the voters. They were not interested in funding that service. So at this time, we cannot provide that service.
How much of your 9,000 miles is combined sewer?
Oh, that's a good question. I don't have those exact details. But our combined system is mostly in the city,
Right.
more or less, separate out in the
So
county.
how's that funding work then? If it's a combined system, who
Mhm.
is it the sanitary that pays for that then?
More or less, once water hits the sanitary system, it becomes sanitary. So things like inlets on the curbs would still be stormwater, but the pipes themselves would become wastewater.
How did you, so you brought the proposition, and so I'm curious, I remember last year, a member of your group came and spoke, and one of the issues, I think, for some folks in Wildwood was that we were not triaged to be one of your top priorities in the top 10 of projects that we're going to be embarked upon. How do you guys determine how that happens?
Like what projects?
Right.
Yeah, we use a cost-benefit analysis. So, we look at the cost of the project and then the overall benefit. And that's something that we do on an annual basis as we're planning out projects. In fact, Jeff can probably speak more to that than I can, how exactly we do that.
Sure. Yeah, so, and this is, we can get into this a little bit more, but our projects that we have on the books, which I provided a map, it's not very useful in this environment, but maybe after the meeting we can go up and take a look at it. But right now, MSD has 6 capital projects that are capital stormwater projects that are identified within Wildwood. As Bess was saying, we don't have any funding to do those projects at this time, but that's what we have on the books. How do we identify projects? Well, it happens primarily through our operations department. So it's driven primarily from customer complaints or inquiries into our customer service department. So if somebody has a problem, they come out. One of our engineers who works, or one of the crews that work in our operations department, will come out, take a look, and if they see something that looks like it's a problem that we could address, then they will identify a project. And from there, we have a process to work that through our system. But as Beth said, again, we don't have any funding right now. The other way we have identified projects in the past is through municipal contact. And so I don't know whether it's part of this group's plan to develop a master plan, any kind of stormwater master plan as part of the effort that's going on here, or whether maybe the city has already done that, I don't know. But we certainly welcome those documents, and we'll bring those in and take a look at them. And then if there's projects on that list that look like they're things that MSD would fund, then we can identify a parallel project at those locations. And so hopefully at some point in the future, you know, when funding might become available, then we could help participate in some of those. But again, all of our projects are based on a cost-benefit analysis. So we have a scoring system, and we can share that system with you if you're doing any kind of master planning. But we look at that, and so we don't do projects in specific areas to spread them out. We look at them based on that cost-benefit analysis and work from the top down.
Joe?
Yeah, I've got, and Kathy, maybe you can get some of the, couple of quick video snippets. I'm glad you're here. Thank you for coming tonight. Been looking forward to having you here. You mentioned Prop S, and I remember when the gentleman, I think he's the head of MSD, came to the meeting, and you said there are 6 projects on the list. I don't remember if there were 6. I thought there were fewer, actually. But when I looked through the pages of projects, we had, like you said, 6. I thought it was 2, if I can recall, but I'll have to look. And yet, when I went through, I saw cities that had pages of projects. And so for the people of Wildwood, how would you expect them to support something if they're not getting the money back?
Yeah, you know, a big.
It's not a good sale.
No, yeah, and you're absolutely right. And the way that we understand that, or how we're looking at it, like Jeff was saying, we find out about we don't go looking for these types of projects. We find out about it by people telling us. Now, there were certain areas that had formed these sub-districts a long time ago, 1960s or so. This isn't really something that we do anymore, but they had formed these sub-districts so that they were paying an additional tax and getting those capital improvement projects through that additional tax. And so a lot of those areas, people were conditioned. They knew that if they called MSD, they would get on the list. Areas that weren't in that, people just don't really think to call MSD in those areas. So our suspicion is that there are more problems in Wildwood, in other areas where there weren't as many projects. And it's more a matter of making sure people know, call us when you have these issues, let us know. We can at least put them in the books so that when we have funding, we can prioritize them accordingly.
So you mentioned sub-districts. So is that an option for Wildwood? Could we form a sub-district? Obviously, we have to get into the detail. And then that way we can really dedicate more for Wildwood citizens.
You know, what I can tell you is there is a mechanism to do that, but what our board is looking at right now is they don't see that as a viable solution moving forward. So it's not something that they're interested in. They want to see a regional solution, something that allows us to address the problems region-wide.
But I think it goes back to the point where, you know, Prop S failed. I know from the Wildwood perspective, we just didn't have any return on that. And so it would have been great to fix issues, and I can't remember the cities off the top of my head, but that was the big shock to me, is as I saw it, one city, I said, how'd they get 2 pages of projects, and Wildwood's got 2 lines?
Yeah.
It doesn't sell it for us.
Well, and you know, that's something that this group can also help us with. I'm sure you get a lot of citizens coming and bringing these types of problems. Let us know, like, we want to know about these things, so we can add those projects. And
So while I have, and I sent a couple of videos to Kathy, because when I see something interesting and I'm driving along the road, I'll take a video or a picture. So these are from April 2017, so they are a while back. But which one, pull the one and I'll tell you which one's which.
This one's Wild Horse.
Yeah, this is Wild Horse Creek Road by Babbler Forest. This was April 2017. I think it was a bad storm back then. I may have caught it before the road closed, but it was coming up that water, as you can see, and fully inundating the creek there. But I know that that road, if I recall, maybe the residents know better, that section has had been closed or near there. Is it because of the flooding?
Multiple times a year.
Okay. So, and then the other one is right here in Ward 8, which is Woods Avenue. I guess the video's not able to be tilted, but this happens at Woods Avenue with regularity. And it's a problem because this all flows downstream into the Rockwoods Reservation. And so we have had a resident, Mrs. Patty Bush, I don't see her here. She comes to these meetings and she lives there, and she's had water come up to the windowsill of her home. When you get down there, it is like a war zone after a great flood. And it's a problem that we're just going to continue to deal with, and that's why I'm grateful that we have this committee. Obviously, the erosion is a big problem, but since you're here, obviously, I want to bring to highlight that these are just 2 videos that I just pulled quickly up here, but you know, we definitely need help here in Wildwood. So we would love to work with you. I would love for you to come up with some good ideas on how we can do something together.
Yeah, what are the 6 identified projects?
You know, I should have had a little list here with me. We have Pine Bend Drive, number 486, storm improvements. And I can certainly provide a little bit more.
Yeah.
None of these projects will we have a detailed scope, but somebody has kind of sketched out a conceptual level idea of what, you know, what the solution would be.
Yeah, I know, in Ward 5, Shiva Court was on there for quite some time. Is it still on the list?
It is, yeah. Shiva Court Channel Improvements is on here. There is Turnberry Place Drive, bank stabilization.
Oh, yeah, yep.
Idlewood, 16308, storm improvements.
Yep.
Valley Road, number 2127, storm sewer improvements. And Ridge Bend Drive, 1601, storm improvements.
And I had, I don't know if it was Rebecca or who it was, that was out walking the creek on Birch Forest Drive and behind Evergreen Forest Drive. So how do we get that on list, since it's obviously not?
So normally these come up through our operations department, so I'm not sure. I don't know who maybe was walking the creek with you, but we can certainly look into that and see. They may have identified a project. I know leading up to April, our operations department was responding to a lot of inquiries where people were having these questions. It was leading up to the election, and so they went out every day, multiple trips a day, and we're looking at different projects. Most of those have filtered through, you know, where they were identifying projects, most of those have filtered through by now, but it's possible that that one's still out there. I don't know.
Can I just add on with the project list? I spoke with Jason Hughes back in April of 2018.
Okay.
You know Jason?
I do.
Yeah, and we had a project that was supposed to be on Cherry Valley Court that had some flooding, so obviously he didn't mention it. But I would like to see if we can make sure that that is on the list, because I thought it was.
Okay, and what, I'm sorry, what was the
It's
other?
Birch Forest Drive and then Evergreen Forest Subdivision Drive, I believe.
But what, instead of everybody putting forth their ward locations, maybe we could just make a list and just, we can do that instead. Because otherwise we'll be here all night naming streets.
Correct, yeah. So I've just got a couple of questions.
Sure.
So I understand the ranking process. I've been out actually with Jason in Turnberry, so I think it was still frustrating. You know, we joked it was kind of like the show, the point like, whose line is it anyway? The points don't matter, because he's moving up and down this threshold of severity. Other people are coming in and on the list as they fix their own yard and given up, and there's, you know, no future money. So selling it, even going out there in person was still really hard for him, even though he needs help. So one of my concerns is, you know, are you ranking large impact areas higher than smaller impact areas, regardless of the severity? So for example, the Highland subdivision for me has huge MSD exposed pipe right now. You guys will actually have to go back in just to maintain your own lines regardless. There's an easement that's maintained in the Highlands as well. So that affects a large portion of people, common ground, backyards, and of course potential to put torque on the lines and rupture them, things like that. But it's not necessarily endangering someone, like someone whose house may fall in to the creek bed on one property. So is there a separate ranking scale for other types of shared property and creek beds for severity, or is it all lumped into one thing?
So our scoring system is, there's one scoring system.
Regardless.
There are not two scoring systems. You mentioned that if there is existing MSD
Correct,
infrastructure there. So we do have funding
for that.
To do those, correct.
So, and I've contacted Jason, I've been out with the trustees, Joe Vinich and I are going back out. My other concern is in terms of accountability for subcontractors. So some subcontractors did the work, did some expansion, and I was told, you know, kind of word of mouth by the institutional memory, that there were some decisions that were made that were odd. So trees and debris by the subcontractors or yourselves left in the middle of the creek bed, which then piled down. So what assurances can you give us that you will hold these workers accountable? Because, you know, we're already dealing with property damage and everything else, so if it's fixed, I want it fixed right. So what are my recourses?
I mean, yeah, if there is, and I can't speak to that particular situation because I'm not familiar with it at all, but in general, you know, I would say our crews, and when we have contractors, obviously it's sometimes a contentious situation because property owners obviously want everything back the way it was, and you know, construction is somewhat disruptive, but we certainly try to put things back.
And are most of them your permanent full-time employee crews, or are they contractors?
It depends on what kind of
It
project.
depends, okay.
Yeah, the size and scope, yeah.
Okay, so my understanding is this was a contract.
Sure.
And
Yeah.
yeah, I can tell you the name later of, I believe, the company that did it. You know, my other question is in terms of designing, do you have a design program? I know you said it would be helpful if we would provide a citywide stormwater management future plan, but from the experience that I had when I went out with a consultant that was an engineer and a hydrologist and a specialist that did not work for you, was that I was told there were odd engineering decisions made by MSD. So what I'm wondering is if perhaps those were great decisions but not great for in a creek bed. So are you using ecologists and other experts that would make good decisions for creeks specifically, not just pipes going through under streets or anything else?
So one thing I think maybe we should point out, MSD typically does not build storm sewer systems or conveyance systems.
Okay.
And that probably comes as a surprise to people, but most of the systems, the way the process works is a developer comes in, they build a system,
Okay.
and then we inherit that system. So.
Like Barrett and some of the other. Okay.
Correct,
Got
yeah,
it, got
yeah,
it,
so
got it.
whoever, you know,
Okay.
if it's a home, if it's a subdivision, you know, they develop that site. Now, I assume the city has some sort of plan review department or something that's looking at that, but an MSD would look at those plans from if it's inside the district, obviously,
Okay.
would look at those plans for if there's any storm sewers that are going to be built and dedicated to MSD, they have to meet all of our requirements. And then beyond that, we have requirements for detention, so that trying to mitigate the negative impacts of development. So they have to build a detention basin generally in the subdivision to offset the increased runoff from the streets and the houses and the
Impermeable
driveways,
area.
et cetera.
Yeah, I think what I was trying to articulate was in the creek bed in my areas where MSD has infrastructure, what I was told by a consultant was essentially, it was odd they chose to do this because it was never going to work in this creek to protect their pipeline. And then in one storm event, all of that protection's gone, many 100-pound boulders washed away, all the riprap is exposed, things like that. So that's why I was asking if there were engineers that had specialized in creek issues making those decisions, because it's costing you money when you have to go back and do it and do it and do it again.
So, yeah, that sounds like a situation where it's a sanitary sewer, and unfortunately sanitary sewers typically are in the low places, and that tends to be near creeks. As much as possible, we are trying to get them further away from the creeks, but there are some that are in very close proximity, and so sometimes they become exposed and we have to do some sort of bank stabilization job to protect our infrastructure. I would say that, you know, those jobs oftentimes are being designed by a consultant, and those consultants have been selected, you know, based on their qualifications. So again, I don't know the specifics of that particular case, you know, and depending on when it happened, I mean, you know, there are lessons learned. Not everything that we've done has worked perfect on the first time, so, you know, that may be a factor also. But yeah, I mean, we are using both inside and outside people to look at those solutions.
John, Ken?
As we develop our plans and standards, if we have consultants that are developing bank stabilization ideas that we believe in that will give a more natural look and do the job, is that something that you would take note of? And if you had to go in and repair and do bank stabilization, you could rely upon that kind of research that we're doing?
Sure, sure. Yeah, I mean, so in the, you know, bank stabilization isn't a new phenomenon, but it is an evolving phenomenon, and there's a trend to being much more natural everywhere.
Right. And that's what we've talked about in the past, and so picking up on these comments, you know, you could have a creek that looks natural and all of a sudden it's just rip-rap to death and it just doesn't look anything like what drew people here.
Sure.
And then the more naturalization, like you're talking about, is definitely the way we're thinking.
Sure.
So if we could go hand in hand with that, even if you use somebody else, subcontractor, to do some of your work, at least they would know what we're looking for as a community.
Yeah, no, and I mean, yeah, we're definitely moving in that direction. I mean, there was a period of time, you know, concrete cowboys, where they built, all of the channels were concrete, and that's proven, you know, in some instances that is an okay solution, but oftentimes it's not, and ecologically it's terrible. And a lot of them are failing, so, you know, they're lessons learned, I guess.
Mother Nature bats last.
That's right, that's right. So, yeah.
So I want to get to the questions so you guys have some time to answer those, but the first thing I was going to just ask before we do that is, do you guys have individuals within your organization that have experience and would be willing to partner with us in Wildwood to locate the municipality and public work funding mechanisms? Because it sounds like you've got a lot of our projects on your list. It sounds like you don't have any money to do them. And so there may be funding mechanisms from federal, state boards that perhaps you can't apply for by yourself, but if you're partnered with maybe a local municipality, is that something you guys have experience doing?
There was a period of time in the past where I know the state of Missouri was offering state stormwater grants, and MSD was an administrator for those inside the district. To my knowledge, there's not a program similar to that operating today. But yeah, if you're aware of one of those, it's possible.
Richard Sherman, anything?
I've got a fair amount to talk about
Perfect.
as a result, especially at the state level and also the federal level, that has come to light this month. It's not money, but if you want me to talk about it now, I'll be glad to. But
Shall we get to the questions, and do you want to come back to you, or do you want to talk? Do you want to hear it now? Sure. What do you think, Rick? Do you want to hear it now?
Let's get his questions first.
Let's answer the questions.
Because there may be more questions.
Sure.
So yeah, if you want to go through your questions.
Okay, yeah, so, and this is, to be honest, kind of, we don't have it's not a formal presentation, so the questions are fine. But one of the questions was, and I guess we pretty much covered that, projects that have been, MSD has slated that are in Wildwood, and so we briefly talked about the 6 projects that we know about now. But, it sounds like you've had some interactions with people from operations, so maybe there's more coming. Certainly, we would encourage if people are having stormwater problems, or sanitary problems for that matter, but they should call the customer service number, and they will send out a crew to look at it, and if it's a stormwater problem, they might send out an engineer to do an investigation. I will say that just because there is an erosion problem does not mean that MSD is necessarily going to identify a project. And it comes back to that scoring point system. To Wildwood's benefit, you're probably, as things are developing here, you're coming in at a little bit better time. People aren't trying to build right up on top of the creek, and so you don't have maybe some of the problems. You have an erosion task force. I'm not aware of any other communities that have an erosion task force. So you're probably getting ahead of the ball on a lot of things relative to other communities. And so erosion that's happening in common ground is probably not going to be something that MSD is going to identify a project for, just because we have other locations in the district where the erosion or flooding problem is directly threatening a structure or a house. Earlier we saw the video, and it sounds like there may be an instance where there could be potentially flooding of a house with the water that was running down that street. That would be something that we could potentially identify a project for. So, I guess one of the questions: what are the current circumstances in Wildwood area that the task force should be aware of? And I guess I'll ask, you all have this group, and you're working to. What is the ultimate goal, I guess, of this group? I'll ask that question.
It's a good question. Basically, initially we want to find out where the problems are.
Okay.
How do we solve those problems? And I guess the third thing is where we get funding to solve the problems. Because there are, especially along Cox Creek, and this all started because of Cox Creek, pretty much.
Okay.
Cox Creek's a disaster zone. But as we get some more of these heavy rains, we're finding out we've got problems in other places also. Anybody else have any interjection?
We're trying to prevent also future erosion issues. We're trying to halt current erosion and try to prevent future. But we've got major problems here in Wildwood. Roads like Strecker. Joe showed Strecker Road after a storm is, and even it's extremely dangerous.
Go, Jeff. Jeff, I think one of the outcomes of this task force
is to fill your list with Wildwood projects.
Okay,
Yeah.
and that's what I was going to suggest, is that, you know, I think I mentioned earlier a master plan, and so if in the process, or, you know, as one of the products that this group produces, is some sort of master plan that identifies those, and if it's just based, you know, erosion based, that's okay. If you want to get into other stormwater issues and flooding issues also, I don't know if that's outside the scope of this group or not, but, you know, all of those are the kind of issues that MSD is certainly interested in, and we would, you know, we would welcome those projects and adding those to our list, because we do want to spread, you know, we want to address the problems all over the district, and part of that is learning where the problems are.
Do you have any kind of cost share programs?
We are not operating any cost share programs today. There have been periods of time in the past where that has, I think, happened, but that's...
Was it a 60-40 previously?
I mean, it was in the 80s probably, so long before my time at the district.
But Jeff, just to, you were asking about, just to piggyback off what Joe was saying. A lot of these issues are not mutually exclusive. The challenge that we're facing is that although the name of the committee is the Erosion Task Force, erosion and stormwater and wastewater management are so connected in so many facets that that's our biggest challenge right now. We're trying to identify these things. It would be helpful, I think, if we could somehow be given what you guys have identified as well, because we're going to be walking all of these creeks very soon, and we'll be identifying at least erosion issues, but certainly understanding in the context of, as we're looking at those locations where you've identified where there's these other issues, I think that would be most helpful for us, because then that would identify where there may be a ability to have partnerships.
Sure, sure. But I wouldn't want to be limited to just these locations. Obviously, we're looking to...
Oh yeah, we're going to give you a lot more.
To expand that. Well, and so what I would suggest is, and maybe you've, just one of the brochures that was sitting out on the table was a channel condition scores. Looks like it was done by Intuition and Logic. I would suggest that you do hire or gain the services of somebody who has geomorphic experience, and I think that's the first step, is you have to understand your creeks. You have to understand what stage they're currently in, because there is an evolution of how creeks form, and so that's going to be an important first step. And I'm not an expert in that area, but I do know that you know, some of these types of, it's better to have an overall picture, because sometimes when you try to fix something in one place, it makes another problem downstream worse. And so if you do that without the right knowledge, you can really complicate the overall system.
Actually, Mark Meyer lives in Wildwood.
Okay, well, there you go. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I need a clarification of something. I live in a district, I was in Ward 1, and Rob over there is in Ward 6. We are the most rural sections of Wildwood. About 95%, I'll say, of our terrain is west of 109, so we're not in your catchment area. But if we have to, I mean, we've got creeks, we've got lots of creeks, and Mr. Rosner pointed out Wildbars Creek, which is a big one, and there's been a lot of flooding and erosion in that particular area. We have been able to keep development under control for the last 25 years, which would not have been the case if Wildwood had not been incorporated the way it was. But nonetheless, we still have problems. If we needed to gain some information about how to protect or do something with a particular creek that needed attention, not development necessarily, but attention to bank stabilization or water flow characteristics, do we go to the Army Corps of Engineers, or do you guys have a way of helping us to consult on problems with that kind of thing, even though we're not in your catchment area?
Sure. you know, I'm sure we could provide some, you know, kind of basic level of review service, but I don't think we're gonna be able to go out and look at anything that's outside of
Well,
the
I assume that
district
you
area.
accept the Army Corps of Engineers decisions in reference to these navigable waterways anyway, is that not the case?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I guess in respect to,
To how to manage them. Is it not true that the Army Corps of Engineers has a jurisdiction on most of those creeks?
Yes.
So you can't do anything. See, I've got residents who want, Russ suggested some stuff about cleaning out creeks and moving sandbars and stuff, but my understanding is that we're not
Correct.
supposed to do that without the Army Corps' okey dokey. Is that not true? Rick can tell you a very specific case. An entire rock shelf from a limestone bluff fell into Bonham Creek by the ballpark down off of Pond Road. In order to get that taken care of, the Army Corps of Engineers said you could break up the rock, but you cannot remove the rock. So they dictated what had to be done to reopen up the stream, because the stream was beginning to build a lake behind it. It was quite interesting to see how that was dynamic was. But anyway, so I guess the Army Corps is still our best bet for us. Is that not so?
or maybe, yeah, I mean, the Army Corps has a regulatory authority there. And so even inside the district, the Army Corps has that same regulatory authority. So if we're doing a creek bank stabilization job, one of our requirements is to acquire that Army Corps of Engineers permit.
Information.
And so the same thing, if a developer is doing anything in a creek,
Or a homeowner?
or a homeowner, and they come to us, you know, if it's inside the district, and they submit that to us, and we review those plans. One of our requirements is usually to show us that you presented this to the Army Corps of Engineers, and then, you know, whether the Army Corps requires a permit or they don't require a permit is obviously their jurisdiction.
Okay.
But we'll either require a copy of that permit or documentation that the Army Corps did require a permit.
Thanks.
I have one more quick question. Obviously, we want to be partners with you in helping our area, and there are certain things you're not going to do outside of your jurisdiction. However, are you interested in sending someone out to walk the creeks with us at various times, even if it's an employee that has a local stake by living in the community? American Water had previously expressed interest in doing this. And if not, at the very least, do you have a procedure in case we see something that we should inform you about? So if we see an exposed line, I'm guessing you would like a GPS coordinate and a picture. Who do we send that to?
So to answering your first question, yes, I think there's a good chance that we could send somebody out.
Great.
We do, in our Department of Environmental Compliance, we actually have crews or employees that is their job. They walk all of the creeks in the district on a rotating basis. So whether it would be potentially somebody from that group, or whether it might be somebody from our operations group, but I would suspect that there's a pretty good chance that that they could do that. And your second question, yes, if you see, if you do come across issues, specifically, I would say with existing infrastructure where maybe there's a sanitary manhole or a pipe that is exposed, then yeah, that would be excellent. If there could be a picture taken and some sort of way of identifying where it is, and it's probably just as easy to run that through our standard customer service request. They will take that information, that way it gets logged, it gets into a service request, it gets routed to the right person, depending on geographically where it is, and then they can come out and take a look at it and move from there. And I think they're pretty responsive.
Yeah, and to Jeff's point on that, I know you were bringing up other areas. Send those to us, but also tell our customer service, like he said, that is the best way to make sure it goes through the process. It doesn't get lost in someone's notebook or something. It's logged appropriately, and we have it on the records.
Thank you.
So identifying projects, we talked about the geomorphic study. I would say the other thing is that one of the things that MSD is currently doing, obviously for the portion that's inside the district, but it's something that maybe the city has a similar program or could employ outside of the district, is the requirements when development does happen. Having detention requirements for flood protection. So we have detention requirements for flood protection, we have requirements for channel protection, and then we have requirements for water quality. And so those are 3 separate events, but the flood protection is, we talk about a 2-year and a 100-year event as being the ones that we regulate to. Channel protection is the 1-year event. So that's, and the intent there is to try to mimic the channel forming somewhere in that 1-year to 2-year event, or the storms that do the most. And maybe I'm preaching to the choir here, you all might be very knowledgeable and experts on this, but those are the storms that are frequently referenced as being the ones that do the most damage, change the channel the most. And so by providing detention for those events, the more frequent events that happen, approximately once a year, that water, the intent of the detention is to meter that water out slowly over the course of 24 hours. And so that better replicates a natural runoff condition, and it protects those saturated banks.
John, a question about the requirements. As we're all aware, we seem to be getting hit with more and more intense storms more frequently. This past year, 109 became a river, and a car was on national TV, floated down in front of the grade school there. Are you all looking at more stronger requirements for detention? Should we be looking at stronger requirements for detention, or is there just nothing we can do when you get 5 inches in 7 hours, or whatever it is, or 7 inches in 5 hours?
Yeah, so it's a good question. We are, we're always looking at those things. Right now, we have not implemented anything where we're moving forward on changing any of our regulations. We're still, for a detention standpoint, we're still at the 100-year event. That's kind of the standard that we operate off of. Our storm sewer systems, though, that are in subdivisions, that design for those is typically the 15-year event. So that's the required, the required design. Now, some storm sewers may have a higher capacity than that, but the design capacity for a storm sewer system is the 15-year storm event. And in newer subdivisions that are, and ones from, the recent history, we look at overland flow paths. So the storm sewer system is intended to convey water during, kind of those more frequent events or up to the 15-year event. But in the design of the development, there needs to be a place for the water to go when it exceeds that amount. And so there needs to be some sort of path, be it down, it might be down the road, or maybe it's a swale between houses, but there needs to be some way to convey that water where it needs to go without causing property damage. So that's something, those are things that the district looks at, and then the third element of it is the water quality aspect. And so that's something that's the newest of the requirements, came online in the district in 2006. And so that's the requirement to treat the 90th percentile rain event. So if the idea is 90% of the rain events that occur will be, the water, the runoff from the site will be treated by that water quality feature. Oftentimes we see bioretention basins is a pretty frequent design feature. And so that's less about metering out the quantity, although it does help mimic a more natural condition because the water flows through those basins and it slows them down. But it's more about treating water quality, and it is also a volume reducing element. The idea is that some of that water will soak into the ground and return to the groundwater table, some of the water is taken up by the plants that are in the bower retention basin. So those are elements that the district is employing today in order to mitigate development. I mean, development by its nature is going to cause more runoff, that leads to more flow in your creeks, and so there is some erosion. But erosion is also natural. I mean, that even if there was no development, there would be some erosion, but those are all things to keep in mind. I would say that MSD has our requirements, but there's nothing that says that the city can't have either equal requirements or even more stringent requirements. That's certainly a possibility.
But there's something to say that we can, can't have MSD have less stringent requirements, obviously. But the reason why I bring this up is Councilmember Garitano and I mentioned about last year with proposition and how it didn't seem like Wildwood was really part of the intent. But yet you mentioned that it's unique that we have an erosion committee. It is, but that's because we have major problems here. That's why we have this committee. This past year, I don't know if you're familiar, maybe you could shed some light on it, because I'd love to know. I know you don't have money to do a lot of these projects. We had a Ward 5 park that had a $91,000 increase by MSD for storm mitigation requirements. Where does that money go? I'm curious to see. I understand that you've got us listed, but I feel like you can list us forever, but if we're increasing money for kids' parks, and we're not seeing a return on the money that we have to pay for MSD, that they're increasing price tags for things like this, I'd like to know where that money goes, because it doesn't seem like it's coming to Wildwood.
So
I don't know if you're familiar with what we're talking about.
I'm not familiar.
So I put you at a disadvantage, but
yeah, no.
I knew your comments. I had to get that in somewhere.
I appreciate that.
I guess my first question was, it was funds that were transferred to MSD?
We already had allocation for the whole project.
Yeah.
And this was an afterthought.
It was sort of in light of your concerns.
Yep.
We feel that by changing the design, your environmental impact will be mitigated. Pay extra X amount.
But we'll let Joe talk.
Yeah.
Why don't you let Mr. Glitch explain to you, because we paid you guys extra money that we didn't really need to pay you. They put a stringent restraint on our project, and that was one issue. The other issue is like Dr. Remy just said, we paid you the money. It went to you. We didn't get the benefit out of it.
Right.
The circumstance is the project was submitted to MSD for review, and initially the area disturbance didn't exceed an acre. It was 7/10 of an acre. The amount of flow out of the project was less than 0.2 CFS. And so initially we were told that there would not be any stormwater management requirement. Shortly after the failure of the proposition and the complaints that were lodged about just the fact that we do have these erosion problems in Cox Creek, we were advised by MSD that now we would be required to do the 3 phases: channel protection, flood protection, and then water quality. Ultimately, water quality was dropped by the Department of Engineering, but it added initially $90,000 to the project, which we didn't budget for, because again, we were initially advised that the district wouldn't be requiring any type of stormwater management facilities. And so we worked through it. City Council was agreeable to allowing us to shift some of our funding to prioritize this. And then we got a better bid as well that helped greatly. But at the end of the day, we felt like it kind of caught us off guard.
Sure. Kind of got penalized because we didn't pass the proposition, yet we had an erosion committee and we weren't seeing anything.
Yeah, and I don't know the specifics of that. I did take a few notes and can look into it a little bit more.
No pun intended, it's water under the bridge. We're on our way.
But if you can bank that amount of money for the next project, we would appreciate that.
Well, but I don't think that money went to MSD. That
No,
was,
no,
that was
no.
expenditures
Yes.
towards additional elements that had to be
Yes,
constructed.
Right.
the contractor and the subcontractor will get that money,
Sure.
but we
Sure.
couldn't get the permits for sanitary without the benefit of completing storm. And
Right.
so we had no choice.
Right, yeah. No, I understand.
And I misstated, the CFS typically is 2.0 at
Correct.
MSD. Ours was 0.7,
Okay.
so substantially lower than the typical threshold.
Right, and so usually the reason that I'm aware of where something like that, so the 2 CFS threshold and the 1 acre are the kind of the standard for typical projects. There is a caveat, is if there are downstream concerns or issues, that triggers it to happen sooner. And so
And there are.
it sounds like that, and so it sounds like that was, I don't know how that initial assessment was conveyed, but it sounds like after further evaluation and looking into it, it was determined that there were downstream issues, and so that's what triggered.
There are, and certainly at the end of the day, if we don't add to those problems, then the money's well spent. I think it was the issue of timing.
Okay, understood.
Yeah, no, it sounds like we just made a mistake in our initial evaluation.
I wouldn't go that far. I live in a glass house.
But as far as you're concerned about the timing with Proposition S would not have changed any of our requirements, so I think that's just a coincidence.
Sure.
Joe?
Yeah, just as Dr. Remy was saying about how, and we talked about before, Prop S and the number of projects, I think too what makes Wildwood very unique is we are the largest city in St. Louis County. And we have the 3rd largest, when I say largest, let me make sure I'm clear, largest by area. So we have more area to cover, which exposes us to more of these issues. And that, again, goes back to looking at the project list. When I looked, I found the project list. Wildwood had 5 projects on the list. Others around us, Chesterfield had 18, Baldwin had 7, Frontenac had 6. I forgot which one this one is, but anyway, they had 12, and I think Clarkson had 3. They were 2 fewer than us on the list. And Clarkson is smaller than us. But we have so much exposure in Wildwood, just the terrain that we have and roads that you've seen the video. I would love one more. I think this one, I just want to show you because this is actually, I think, Hawks Creek, right? If it goes along West Glen Farms.
Yep.
This is Councilmember McCutcheon's ward. I'm going to ask if you could pull that up because this one, I think, the picture is worth 1,000 words of what the water has done in Hawks Creek. And again, further up from where the area that Dr. Remy is.
It's actually right behind my house.
So, yes, Councilmember Farmer's here, sorry about that. I don't know, can you make that bigger, or is that the biggest it goes?
I can make it bigger, but we're gonna lose
Yeah,
resolution.
that's good, I think that shows it. The water tore apart and exposed this water line from Missouri American Water, which they came and did an emergency repair. But this is a significant line. I mean, if that line, if we lost that line, we would have had a lot of homes impacted with the water outage. So it's all destroying the creeks that we have here. And again, I just wanted to reiterate what Dr. Remy is saying. But I forgot I had this picture before. And I think this one truly tells a story
Yeah, so
of what's going on.
that drop from the top of the area there to the bottom underneath the pipe is about 8 feet. And it happened in one
This was
night.
October of, this past October.
Yeah, I mean, it had been slowly, I mean, there was a lot of stuff that had been moved around, but it happened fast. And the rather large concrete blocks that I would guess are about the size of a school bus, have no idea where they went, but they're anywhere near there.
Well, and to your point about not being very many projects. I think that's a good, I think it's good that we're here today because education is probably the best way that we're going to identify these projects. Resident education and community education so that people know that they can reach out to MSD. And, unfortunately, like we've said, we're not in an ideal situation here where we can do a whole lot about these problems right now. But at least you can be on the list and kind of in the queue so that if some point in the future there is a funding source that comes through, then we will be in a better position.
I think that if the case would have been made a better convincing case of addressing these issues in Wildwood, I think the reaction would have been better than what you had. And again, I thank you for coming. I know you probably walked out of here and say, wow, that was some meeting. But maybe you get this all the time. But obviously, there's just a lot that has been building up with these issues here with us. So thanks again for coming.
Jeff, one more thing. So I don't know if you guys have experienced with this with other municipalities, and this is hypothetical, so please no one get excited. But if Wildwood were to put up before their voters a stormwater tax, and that would raise revenue, how does that affect the relationship with MSD and development of these projects and be able to move forward?
Not at all. I mean,
That's
there are
obviously our
other
money.
it would be municipal money.
Right.
And so, you wouldn't have to wait for MSD at all. You could spend those on the projects as you saw fit. MSD's involvement, at least initially, on those would be from a review standpoint. If the projects were within the district, then we would ask for the right to review what was being proposed. But beyond that, we wouldn't tell you where or how you could spend that money.
And if we developed a master plan and then were able to get something like this approved by the voters, if that's what they were interested in doing, you would partner with us with our master plan for mutual projects that were of interest?
Correct, yeah, we've done similar with other municipalities. I think Ladue has a stormwater tax, so they have their own revenue source, and they've got a master plan, and they are working off of that to projects that they work on. And we have, looked over that master plan and have incorporated some of those projects into our list.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, it would be a similar situation, similar scenario.
But that won't take away the projects that you guys are planning on doing with
No.
your own funding sources, correct?
No, I mean.
Would not change priority, it would.
No. And the only way that they would come off of our list is if you solved them and there wasn't a problem there anymore. If the municipality said that we can't wait any longer and we need to address this, then obviously they would come off the list. Or if homeowners or there was something else that changed in the environment that caused it not to be an issue anymore.
Richard?
Yeah, Jeff, you and I had a really nice, good conversation back October 2nd, and I appreciated your time. And I came away with what you would do or not do. And at the time, I was also at the same time holding out my tin cup. But anyway, I've been hearing the term projects, and that you would do some cooperation with us on the term project. When you say project, I'm not sure what all you're speaking of outside of your own infrastructure, your actual work in piping and laterals. At the time we spoke, I came with the impression that when it comes to anything having to do with a natural open waterway, you're not into that at all. Or is it possible, if the natural waterway is close enough to your infrastructure, that you would cooperate doing a fix, I guess, on both sides, not only your laterals, but also piping, but the natural waterway? I'd like an answer to that.
Well, so I think, and it's a good point, I should have brought it up earlier. MSD doesn't, so we have infrastructure that we own and maintain. And that infrastructure is in easements that has been dedicated to MSD.
Yeah.
That's one of the requirements. Natural channels are not a MSD asset. We don't own the property and we don't have any easement rights, and so we don't maintain natural channels. That being said, if there is a natural channel and there is a house and that channel is, the erosion is encroaching upon that house, then we would identify a project in that location. We would, build that project, but typically we don't take ownership of that. There's not an asset there that we own afterwards.
What would you do in that condition? Well, we've got creeks that are getting into backyards.
Sure.
What would you do then? What would MSD do?
Well, and I mean, obviously, it's site dependent, but, a standard practice is do something. You need the geomorphic analysis to understand what's happening in the creek, because the picture that we showed earlier, I mean, that's a head cut that is moving up that creek. Now, maybe it's gonna stop because it's gonna get to that bridge or that culvert, and it looked like that culvert might have had a concrete bottom. And so those actually are beneficial in that stops that head cut from moving. But what we would do would stabilize that bank, and one of the important things is stabilizing the toe, where the bottom of the bank.
Bottom of the bank?
Bottom of the bank where it combines with the bottom of the channel.
Yeah,
That's the critical location to kind of lock in. And so if there's any riprap or revetment or something hard, that's probably where we would, and sometimes that's not needed, but if you've got a fast moving stream, that's probably where we would focus that hard armor. And then maybe up the bank for a little bit, and then either transitioning into some sort of planted revetment or something of that nature. Sometimes we do, they'll do planted riprap where they will intentionally introduce plants into the riprap so that over time it grows up and you don't even know that revetment is there.
So you finance that initial construction, and after that, you're gone, no maintenance then after that. Is that correct?
Correct. Typically, those are non-capital projects.
I
And
see.
so at the end of that project, MSD doesn't have an asset there that we own and maintain.
But you don't always do this way though. So the owners, I don't mean to interrupt you. So if you wouldn't mind writing down Wildwood Meadows in 2017, 2018, you guys actually replaced all the piping in Cox Creek. We described the erosion issues directly with you. You also agreed that this would be great, that you could potentially fix this, but then turned around and said, nope, we're just gonna fix the pipe, and didn't want to touch the erosion whatsoever. And you actually buried the pipe at a different level, specifically not to address the erosion problem. And I spoke to not only folks, and I'll have to go back to my notes to figure out, I spoke to people directly from MSD and directly your employees that came out to the site routinely who said, absolutely, we should fix this, but they don't want to touch it. So that didn't happen, and that's in part why we're here today.
And I'm not familiar with that one either.
That's why I'm asking you to go look into it, because it's important.
Yeah. It's one of those issues where if they're working on a sanitary pipe, they can use, that, as Bess talked about at the beginning, we're looked at as one utility, and we operate as two utilities, both a stormwater utility and a wastewater utility. And so, because we don't have the stormwater funding, that would be my initial observation as to why they walked away from that. It probably, it sounds like they acknowledge that there's something there that needs to be done, but there was no funding source to do that. So they have the funds to do the sanitary work. They did that work, but they unfortunately can't.
Yeah, these projects that Jeff was talking about, like bank stabilization, fall under the funding area that we don't currently have. So these are more or less hypothetical projects for the most part.
Joe?
I also spoke to your Rainscaping small grants program also, which is a small, division of, it's an MSD.
Yeah.
So I don't know, but the amount they talked about, every little bit helps, that that indicated would possibly be some help from that aspect of, or division of MSD. Are you?
Using
I talked to a fellow named
grants
Kirk.
for,
Pardon me?
so, you're talking about using rainscaping grants to address erosion issues?
Yeah,
I
it
just
is.
wanna
It was called the Rainscaping Small Grants Programs. I talked to a Kirk Lambrecht,
Mm-hmm.
and he indicated that they had some small amounts that could possibly be available.
Yeah, and those rainscaping projects are usually used to help capture water where it falls. And so
Mhm.
in that way, you know, property owners can make improvements to their own property to capture more water, which would keep that water from getting into the creeks as quickly.
I see.
Keep,
Okay.
but it wouldn't be, you know, providing bank stabilization or anything. It would just,
No, yeah, right.
But the grants are for individual homeowners and not municipalities.
Yeah, from my notes I have here that it's grant amounts, for individuals and to organizations,
Mhm.
and it's small, that they plan. Well, and then Kirk said they were looking to this, having this next proposition pass before that money is available, so.
Yeah, so initially that was a program that we only offered in one of our watersheds just because it also helped with some of those regulatory things that Jeff was talking about that were especially concerned there. Now we are looking to expand that program, but again, it's not going to be capital projects from that.
Yeah.
Yeah, more to come. They're going to roll out that program, but it has not happened.
Okay.
Joe?
So Jeff, let's say a capital project that's initiated by the district for sanitary purposes inadvertently accelerates erosion along the natural channel. Is that something you could look at and see if that is a fix you all could accommodate?
It's a possibility, and certainly the if there is MSD structure or MSD infrastructure that is threatened, so if there's a sanitary pipe and it's along the creek and it's threatened, somewhat ironically, we can spend money to protect that because that would be sanitary dollars that are being spent to protect a sanitary asset. So yeah, there is the ability to address, you know, if there's an MSD structure or infrastructure that is being threatened, then yeah, there could be a possibility there.
Thank you.
Is there any possibility that, say, the tax passed for MSD, keeping those taxes within certain municipalities, the taxes those people pay would stay in the municipality and supply their needs that they need?
No, you know, like I mentioned earlier, our board is really interested in regional solutions, and the big driver behind that is that these are regional problems. And what I mean by that is that water doesn't care what municipal boundaries it's in. When we look at these issues, we're looking at the full picture. And so splitting up how that funding is done means that we can't address big picture issues correctly.
What about doing it by watershed?
Yeah, I mean, again, our board is interested in regional solutions. Now we do, you know, we have, you know, a rate commission that reviews stuff like rates. That is an independent body, and that's the body that could propose something along those lines of watersheds. They certainly seek input if that's something that you would like them to consider if this becomes, you know, a possible funding source.
Ready to do your own question?
I mean, I think we've bounced around a little bit, and I think we've hit on most of them. You know, I guess, and maybe the city has already done this. One of the questions is what can the city be doing, or what should the city be looking at? And we talked about the master plan. Ordinances to protect the riparian corridor in any future development. You know, having common area along creeks is a, you know, making sure that that's incorporated into development. Those are things that, that can be done. And that, you know, it allows, streams are natural, they move around, so giving them that ability to move around in a natural environment without threatening property or assets is important. So those are some ideas that could be done. And just looking at your, at you know, future development. And it sounds like there is maybe some guidance and the city takes an active role in that, but how you allow that to happen and where you allow that to happen can play a big role in what happens in the creeks and sometimes the problems that can precipitate after the fact. So.
Correct me if I'm wrong, Joe, but we're probably the only one in the St. Louis area that has a natural resource protection ordinance.
We're only one of a few communities across the country.
Okay. Well, that's good. That's great. Yeah. I mean, it doesn't lessen, well, maybe it does lessen. It at least keeps the problems that you're currently experiencing from getting worse and hopefully reduces the number in the future. But I do realize that there are existing problems that you still have to address.
Yeah, let me address that point about protecting the area with development. It's been a while now, but a number of years ago, I live off of Pond Road, which is just west of 109. We're in the 3-acre lot subdivision. We've left a lot of things that are natural in our subdivision. We've not developed directly adjacent to creeks, left a lot of trees, a lot of grasslands where they were already in existence. But unfortunately, up on a ridge at the top of our creek drainage system, where the creek headwaters are, or the Bonham Creek, they built a high-density subdivision years ago in St. Louis County. That was one of the reasons, by the way, why St. Louis County was sent packing and we took over as the city of Wildwood, because they wouldn't listen to us about the fact that the runoff was going to increase the flow of the creek, and it did. Unfortunately, at that time, MSD was dragged into this fracas because they had to dig underneath their highway on 109 to connect Lafayette Trails, the subdivision, to the sanitary sewer system. We told them not to do that either, and this way they would not be able to develop the high-density subdivision. We were completely ignored, and MSD cooperated with the county and the developer to do that. In the future, just as a piece of advice, don't do that again. And we would appreciate that you follow some of our recommendations in the way we develop things, because we have a crazy reason for why we do it, and that reason works very well when we get cooperation. It's just a piece of advice. Okay, thanks.
Typically, MSD is development neutral, so we neither promote nor prohibit. And we, you know, St. Louis County, if they were the agency in charge, that would fall under their purview. The other thing is, just like MSD doesn't build storm sewers typically, we do sometimes when we are addressing problems, but the majority of our system has been donated to us. We don't build sanitary sewers or extensions like that. So that would have been a project that the developer built. Now, clearly they would have had to have MSD's permission.
They hooked to your system?
Absolutely, absolutely. And they would connect to our system, but it would not have, it would have been something that was not driven by MSD.
You weren't developing neutral when you charged us $91,000. I'm sorry, but the truth is the truth. It's a hard thing, the truth, you know?
Yeah.
No, but what Jeff is saying is that
I know.
we have specifications that we
I know,
can hold
and
people
that
to,
was-
and we can't go beyond.
And that was then, and this is now, and Wildwood has its reasons for what it's done over the years, and unfortunately, I've been very close to why those things were done. I spoke out very vigorously against that development for part of that reason, and that was not the only one that was done that way. On the adjacent area, on the other side of my subdivision, they built another high-density subdivision in which they dug under the highway, connected to the sewer line across by the school at Babbler Elementary School. They had a pump station in there, and then promptly flooded the valley down there on Shepherd Valley because they backed the sewers up because they put too much pressure on the lines, too much flow into the line system. Now, you can't tell me that MSD didn't know or shouldn't have known that that was gonna be a problem. It's their sewer line, right?
Right.
Okay. My point has been made.
Thank you very much for
Anyone else?
coming tonight.
Yes, thank you very much.
Thank you.
I have one more question.
Sure.
There's a lot of very, very intelligent people at the district, 3 of which are with us tonight. You all kind of looked in the crystal ball and said, is climate change here? Are we dealing with these kind of storms where we can't design for them? And what are you all thinking about in terms of the future? Can you answer that?
You were shaking your head, I don't know whether you got it.
Yeah, I have my answer. I don't know if you, as the planning department representative, have.
Yeah, I mean, I alluded a little bit earlier, I mean, we're certainly aware, we're watching the trends, we, you know, every time it rains, it has a negative impact on us and, you know, and all of our staff, the crews that have to go out, obviously the residents and property owners too. So we are looking at those things. Right now, we do not have, there's no plan in place to make any changes as we sit here today.
Do you look at, what do you believe the trend to be then? If you're looking at the trends based upon the storm events we're experiencing of late, is there any, what do you think the trend is? Do you think it's just an anomaly the last couple of years, or do you believe that, I know it's a tough question, but it goes
Well,
to the
we're
heart
not
of it.
in the
Yeah.
business of analyzing weather and what's causing it, but no, you're right. I mean, things
But
are
you're
absolutely
investing
changing.
billions and billions of dollars in infrastructure that's dependent on gravity, which means you put it at the low points in the
Mhm.
landscape.
Sure.
So it behooves you to look at the future and say,
Sure. Yeah, and that's not what I was, trying to
Sure.
imply by
Yeah.
that. We are certainly keeping an eye on it. I know that just this past year, we had 4 500-year rain events just in our service area. 500-year rain events are not supposed to happen that often by definition.
Right.
So, are things changing? Absolutely. Are we aware of it? Keeping an eye on it? Absolutely. Are we considering how that would affect us? Absolutely. That being said, tonight, we don't have any definitive plans moving forward that we can share with you.
well, it's reassuring you're looking at it. Because you're the dog that wags the tail here.
Have you changed the way you define your 15-year events that you design to right now? Because a 15-year event is twice a month now, honestly. We had 2 disastrous 6-inch in a few hours rainstorms, and the creeks were ponds, right? 500 feet across, and flooded the roads and so on and so forth. And that's out here that's out in the wilderness where you guys don't go, so you may not care that much. But the facilities you do maintain, they're going to be overstressed in the future. Have you changed any of that? That's the question.
Yeah, to this point, no. I mean, and we have, 2010-ish, we did an analysis, and that, a lot of our rainfall analysis was based on data through that time period. And so I realized that here in these last few years, it's been intense, but throughout the 2000s, it was intense too. So I guess at some level, we have incorporated some of that into our current numbers that we're using, but we have not made any additional changes subsequent to that.
Yeah, just clarification. So if I tell residents that have a huge concern about erosion in their backyard, I'm supposed to tell them to call customer relations? Is there a particular person that they call? Because I don't want them coming back and saying, well, I couldn't get anybody to listen to me or to address it. So you just call the regular customer service number, or?
Correct, yes.
No particular person to ask for?
No, because it will, the person, the customer service representative will create what's called a service request. And I know people have a they think, oh, I want to talk to somebody, I want to talk to the direct person. But believe me, in our system, that is better because that creates a permanent record in the system. You'll get a number that's associated with it. Whoever the caller is, they should ask for that service request number. Our crews are pretty good, I think, about responding, and then there'll be a letter or some sort of follow-up that is sent. But if you don't get that follow-up, or you need more information, or you want to report additional on that issue while it's still open, if you have that service request number, you can call back with that number, and it plugs you right back into that issue and takes you from there. So it truly is the best route forward. And I've got just a couple of the customer service cards here that I can leave, but I'm sure we can get the city some cards to have and distribute if you would like
I
that also.
appreciate that, thank you.
John?
You mentioned, picking up on what Joe was saying, you mentioned 2010 was sort of the last kind of look.
Yeah, and I don't want to be quoted on, I don't
No.
exactly know what the year was, but we analyzed our rainfall
Take this
locally.
message back tonight.
Okay.
It's 2020.
Yeah, no, right.
Let's do it again, please. The reports just this last week on the news from the government sources, the 2010 to 2019 hottest decade, 2019 hottest year. You get the energy built up in the oceans, and we are getting massive storms. It's powering these storms. It is here. And if we don't do anything, if you don't do anything to look at your regulations, if we don't do something, we've got to try.
No, absolutely.
It
It can't
Car
be
Creek,
ignored, I understand.
I've been out here since, '66, and Car Creek at 109, Hamilton Creek topped the bridge. I've never seen that. And flooded 109, that's that day, the car went on. It did it twice in a month. So it's happening, baby. so please, it's happening.
We're aware, we're not ignoring it, and I hope what we said didn't give that impression. We're
No, I
absolutely
got it,
aware.
I'm just reinforcing.
Sure.
Absolutely.
Thank you guys for your time.
Yes, thank you
Thank
very
you.
much.
Thanks a lot.
And thank you all for what you're doing. Like we mentioned, we're not familiar with any other erosion task force, so thank you for serving your community in this way.
One more thing. If you have any guides or resources available that you would give the average citizen on how to maintain creek property, the simple stuff, don't throw trash in the creek, don't, flood your storm sewers with debris or anything like that, the education committee would appreciate it because we have the opportunity to disperse that and give that out. So if it's already created, we won't reinvent the wheel.
Yeah, absolutely.
So if you could send that to staff, and I'll make sure the chair gets it. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And I have a stack of cards. I'll leave these here if anyone seems to.
Thank you
All
again.
right, thank you.
Thank you.
Hopefully the roads are okay. Don't fall. Be safe out there.
But if they're flooded, you pay attention.
Yeah, I don't want to float away, especially after leaving this meeting.
If they're flooded and they're frozen, you're in big trouble.
May I say something?
Yes, ma'am. Real quick.
Thank you. I am Louise Bell, and Soil Water Conservation District, SWCD. I'm one of the supervisors for St. Louis County. We were given this at a meeting a while back, and I think it would be wonderful if we could get a box full of these and hand them out to the current people that you mentioned. Stream Care Guide. It just gives you so many things that you can do. We have had to do them on our stream. So if you want to avoid worrying about getting tarred and feathered, like it might have been 150 years ago, then most of this stuff we can do ourselves. We don't have to pay some consultant or some fancy engineering team to come and do the work, but we have to know what to do and make sure it's being done right. So there are, of course, I went to the meeting where you had 116 counties in the state of Missouri, and we had our annual meeting down in Lake of the Ozarks. And the man from Wildscape Environmental Services came. And his name is Kuehn, E. Kuhn, at wildscapeenvironmental.com. And he has a good thing about a stream bank, restoration, stream stabilization and restoration services. And the, you know how these meetings are, the things that the people really filled up the room to learn about that, because the whole state of Missouri has a problem. It's not just here in St. Louis County. But St. Louis County, we are in the Mississippi, a whole watershed. So we really have to behave and all the work that we do. And I hope that if anybody is asking the Wildwood, what are you doing about climate change? We can talk about the things like the ordinances that should be made and should be, if they have to be, only go before the voters before they're made, do it. We just have got too much to do. Now, as far as this little one, you know Gateway Gardener, you pick that up at your grocery stores. This happens to be the September 2019 one that has an article, Native Riverbed Plants. Wow. There's a whole bunch of good ideas in there. That's from Scott Woodbury, right out here at the Shaw Nature Reserve, wrote that. So there's another person you can call and ask. But certainly anything that you can plant, you want your great big rocks at the toe, and then above that, to preserve your bank, you've got to get things growing in that bank. And the more things that will really hold the soil, the better. The native plants have longer roots, much longer than your overly mowed, grasses like Kentucky bluegrass, and there's this fescues and stuff. Get the native plants. Grow Native is a good resource to find that. DJM Consulting in Wentzville. And then there's Pure Air Native. They grow a lot of the seed right up here in Florissant. So there's a lot that can be done without having to have the government do it. I live west of 109, so really when you're west of 109, we don't get any help. We have to worry about septic tanks and all that. And I myself wish that we would be allowed to have a composting toilet. Why do we have to put all this into the water anyway? The state of New York has finally decided to not use any chemical fertilizers on the lawns in the public properties in the state of New York because so much of that stuff ends up in the groundwater or ends up in the drinking water. It's one of the reasons. Anything we can do to increase the ability of the water to infiltrate into your lawn and stay there and not run off is going to be great. The thing that we did when we built our house, we built the house in '98. Once the lawn area was graded, we put on 2 inches of compost from St. Louis Composting, and then we put the sod on top. We did a little rototilling, but if you probably didn't have to rototill if it was only 1 inch thick, but you probably had to if it was 2 inches thick. Anything to get organic matter into that hard soil. Increase the, you know about getting your soil tested? Get your soil tested. Your extension service, they're right here in Kirkwood. They'll take care of it.
I've got some good news for you. Some of the organizations that you mentioned, we're going to have an event for our citizens, and they can, Mo Prairie Foundation will be there, Extension will be there. In fact, this is a great segue, so I'll go ahead and hand this out. The task force will be there. So if you want to learn about how to get the invasive honeysuckle out of your creek bed, and then you're thinking, now that I have it out, what do I stabilize the bank with? You should come to this.
Great.
There's lectures. And if you go to the website, there's a full list of partner organizations, and it's a free event. We do ask you to register ahead of time. Hopefully we'll have a stream table there and brochures as well. We're trying to confirm the Botanic Gardens for sure, and we've reached out to the Science Center, and those might be the only 2 additions to the list, but there's a whole list of stuff. Lectures inside and booths outside, and we're featuring our garden center. So we're covering a lot of this. Please come and spread the word and check the website.
All right, great. People will do it automatically.
Do you guys have one of these?
Joe, do you want to start the discussion of the consultant proposals?
Yes, sir, if you'd like.
Joe, just quick, he's gonna send a PDF to you, so if you ever wanna print more of these out.
Yeah, I'll leave these, but yeah, we can get to, make sure we get the PDF of that map to you.
Thank you, Jeff, I
Yep,
appreciate
no,
it.
And thank you all, appreciate it.
Thank you.
Giving us the time.
Thanks.
Mr. Co-Chairs and members of the task force, as you know, the critical location subcommittee has been kind of waiting on training. And that training was requested to come from experts that have direct experience in the watersheds and have done these tasks before. Early on, Dr. David Hammer, Professor Emeritus at the University of Missouri-Columbia, did a presentation for the task force. The task force appreciated that presentation, and more so, I think, as well, just the fact that Dr. Hammer's been involved in the city of Wildwood since its inception. The desire was to have Dr. Hammer provide a great deal of information and assistance in this regard, and the department's been in contact with Dr. Hammer on and off over the past several months. Most recently, Dr. Hammer received a contract that was included in your agenda packet. Originally, the amount was $5,000, but as you know, at our last meeting, there was a discussion amongst the Ordinance Review Committee, Subcommittee, about having Dr. Hammer review all of our ordinances relative to land use and development. Therefore, the department did add additional funds, an additional $2,500 to cover that amount. Obviously, if the contract is acceptable to the task force members, we'll only spend what we need to spend. It's not a blank check, so to speak, that will be written at the start of the process. We'll receive billings for services, and as we reach that amount, or if we don't, then we would come back to the task force and advise of such. Obviously, Dr. Hammer's been a little elusive of late, and I'm sure there's good reasons for that. But at the last meeting as well, the task force members asked the department to reach out to Intuition and Logic. Again, another firm that specializes in stormwater management and watersheds. Mark Meyer, as John Gunther mentioned, does reside in Wildwood, so I contacted Mark Meyer, the owner and principal of Intuition and Logic, and he provided a scope of services along with a estimate of those services at approximately $11,000. That includes the critical locations services. It did not include reviewing the ordinances per se that the city has in place at time. The question becomes to me, will Dr. Hammer be that person that's reliable enough to get us out into the creeks and to achieve our goals? And I believe so, yes. But again, that's a decision you all have to make in terms of, is it preferable to have a local company like Intuition and Logic do the work, or do we want to work with Dr. Hammer, who will be coming from Columbia, Missouri? I think the cost differentials are not that substantial relative to what we typically see from consultants in this regard. So really tonight, I'm presenting both of them to you. Both have expressed interest in doing the service for the city. And so with your direction, the department will take the next step. Thank you.
So, Mr. Lynch, in the two proposals, they're not exactly the same for what they need. Do you think that, given the scope of what we are undertaking, is it advantageous to consider both of them?
The department had thought of that because each brings a little different specialty. I view Dr. Hammer somewhat as a generalist. He sees the bigger picture, the watershed itself, but has the expertise as an engineer, a geomorphologist, and a soil scientist. But from a practical term, from a permitting perspective, Intuition and Logic has that day-to-day experience that Dr. Hammer doesn't.
But it's certainly reasonable to consider offering them both contracts, but certainly starting Dr. Hammer perhaps on reviewing some of the ordinances.
Yeah.
While intuition and logic is doing more of the granular details.
I would agree, primarily because of the lack of response of Dr. Hammer. I think the fact that he's worked with the city and is knowledgeable and has already identified areas is great for not reinventing the wheel. However, some work is better than no work, and I know as the critical identification committee, we have been at a standstill for a long time. I have residents that we have promised to get back to, but because we haven't been able to get Dr. Hammer's response, and you're aware of this, I'm really speaking generally to the committee, I personally have some very upset residents, and I feel like I'm just kicking the can down the road every month that I don't hear from Dr. Hammer. So my preference, would be at what point do we sort of cut bait? And so I would push for intuition and logic and have Dr. Hammer maybe review the ordinances, and that's great because he can do that whatever hour he wants. He doesn't have to travel. It can be remote work, and then if and when he becomes more available, then we could utilize him more. But I don't want to have more months of no progress and end up, in the poison ivy and the heat and the muck when we could have the winter and spring to get some work done.
Is there an overlap between their two contracts?
Not as much as one might think, and certainly we could address any overlap to ensure that we're not paying for the same service twice.
Okay. I would concur with Dr. Remy that I think it's important to have both of them for the reasons that have already been stated, local, responsive, but Dr. Hammer's got that long-term knowledge that I don't think we can afford to give up. But I don't know if you've been in contact or if you can say, time's up, we gotta have some action here.
Yeah, if we can set like a 2-week span or something, you start, within 2 weeks, that's fine. If not, then we go with intuition logic. But Dr. Hammer obviously helped write the ordinances, so he needs to look at those to see if there needs to be changes, because he originally put them together and we all voted on them. But he is the expert, but he's excellent when you're walking the creeks. I mean, pointing out things.
Oh, yeah.
So if we can get him down to a time frame, if not, then he's just going to probably do the ordinance.
The contract covers that. It says time's of the essence and it has to be done by June 1st. And I'm okay with June 1st as a completion date myself, but he's the guy. I mean, he's the guy. And
to walk the creeks.
Yeah, and to do the ordinances as well.
Before vegetation gets out.
When was the last time he answered you? If you don't mind.
I want to say it was the first week in January. I don't know the exact date, but it was
very
well, it was either the 2nd or 3rd. That was when I got back to work from the holiday. And I made that a priority to get in touch with him.
Okay.
A key component of all of this may be, can we afford it? And I did budget as part of 2020 as in our consultant and contractor services line items enough money to cover the total of both if you choose as task force to recommend that.
So I'm going to make a motion. I'm going to make a motion to produce legislation if we vote on this today, so that not this Monday, but 2 weeks from now, we'll vote on this at City Council. Because I would love us to get permission to move forward with this right away so that we're ready to go for our February meeting and we could get started. And I think the motion would include providing contracts to both of these people, these two groups, because they offer two different approaches that are both needed to be able to move forward productively.
So first and second reading.
Correct.
Okay.
But we can't do it obviously for this Monday's council, so we have to unfortunately push it off for the next. So if we make the motion and pass it here, then we would just rely on your production of the legislation.
I think there's a bit of good news. Given Dr. Hammer's contractual amount, our city administrator can approve that. It's under $10,000, whereas intuition and logic is just over $10,000 and would need to go to city council, consistent with your motion.
Can I ask one more question first?
Well,
Please, real quick. Oh, I'm sorry. I was just going to, Can you give us a tiny bit more detail on what intuition and logic is actually going to provide? Because I know what Hammer brings to the table, but, and the intuition and logic guy, he's been at my place for like 4 hours, and so I know him as well, but I'm struggling with exactly what he's going to provide us.
From my discussions with Mr. Meyer, he has done classes where he has taught how to assess a creek situation, whether this is a priority erosion area, a medium, that kind of thing. And also he is the person that can assist us in the mapping so that we get a record of it that can be transferable, maintainable, that kind of thing. So he can step in almost immediately and start that training component that we've all kind of wanted, so that when we get out into the field, we're all using the same terminology and all providing, relatively speaking, the same data, so that when it goes into the format that we're using to record it, it's consistent.
Great.
A couple of questions I sent to Kathy where Intuition Logic is going to create a PowerPoint presentation. Is that specific to us? Because I assume he's already had some type of presentation. Why are we paying for something he's already created?
I think he's going to rebrand it, so to speak, and use more pertinent representations or examples from Wildwood.
And the other one was data entry forms. I would think he already has those.
Yes, and again, from the perspective, it may be generic or specific to another community. So I assume there's a little bit of time that Intuition and Logic would need to kind of update the forms or the data entry sheets.
And it may be that Dr. Hammer was wanting to know we're really serious about this with a contract. So maybe since he has a contract, maybe he'll come forward.
As I say, I wish he was here tonight.
So in the past, he's always been pretty reactive
Yes.
to our needs.
Yes, this is unusual. This isn't something that typically we experience at any time during the initial development of the master plan, the update that occurred 10 years later, or those individual projects where we've asked him to participate. So I'm sure there's a good reason, but like I say, we've got to get moving. Councilmember Edens is right. We don't want to be out there in July.
No.
Walking the creek, because as we found the day Dr. Hammer, Ms. Edens, and I did, it's incredibly difficult to focus after a bit, because you just, if it's 90 degrees outside the creek, it's 120 in the creek, it seems like.
And you can't see as much either without vegetation. Anyone else?
Should we vote on the motion?
We'll vote on the motion.
Are we, is
Need a
it,
second?
I second.
is it for us to vote on both at council, or do you want to do one where Sam approves the one he
We can
can't?
move forward with Dr. Hammer, but we still need to vote on it, though.
Yeah.
Okay.
Roll call vote, please.
Member Gunther?
Yes.
Member Sturman?
Yes.
Member Rambo?
Yes.
Member Archeski?
Yes.
Councilmember Grignani?
Yes.
Member Edens?
Yes.
Member Remy?
Yes.
Member Farmer?
Yes.
Member McCutcheon?
Yes.
Member Garretano?
Yes.
Thank you for your input and the motion.
Joe, I have a follow-up motion. I'd like to make a motion that right now we set aside 2 dates. Preferably, the first date would be at a location that would be able to allow for citizens en masse to come and learn from the Intuition Logic presentation, because therefore then from there the committee, that group could be the group that would be educated, that will go out to the Greeks, and I want this to be publicized. And I think if they're going to do a presentation, they would probably prefer to do it once or twice, but not just to us and then the public. I want to do the public and everyone right from the get-go. And so my motion is to actually get it. If it's a school, just find a location for us and a date, and let's move forward.
And if we could get Dr. Hammer at that same one, that would be an amazing presentation.
I'll see what I can do. Is there a date that's preferable for the task force, since you are also being educated on how to do it as well?
I think it's Saturday.
I think a Saturday morning is probably the best bet for most folks, unfortunately, including the public.
assuming that we get the contract for intuition and logic to city council for the 10th. Well, I mean, obviously we can do it any Saturday we choose.
I think we would probably want to do it, having done some events, you got to give people a little bit of lead time. So, I mean, I would think once we okay the contract, or even if we have a pretty good sense that that's going to be what's happening, we can probably plan it like a month out from that should be sufficient.
Well, let's look at March 7th.
Okay.
March 7th is pretty reasonable.
Yeah.
That's what I'll shoot for and let them know.
And then we can do some publicity once we get to that point. Sorry to leave lower night. I'm sure you're probably gonna mention stuff, but you know I'm ready to move.
Nope, no, that's all I've got. No,
Perfect.
this is perfect.
Oh, we have to vote on that still, or no? Do we need
Nope, we voted. I think we're up to the updates.
Don't we have to
on-
vote on the second
We have to
one?
vote
I don't
on
have
the
a second one.
I'll second it.
Oh.
You want a voice vote or you want a roll call?
Wait a minute, what's this one for?
Just to set it up, the
For the-
date.
Oh,
Oh,
yeah,
I
events.
apologize, yeah.
Any other discussion? No, you got the two motion and the second? Okay. Roll call vote then, please.
Sorry, I gotta figure out who's here or not.
Do you want to just do a voice vote?
It's up to you.
We can do that.
Mhm.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstain?
Well, that was easy, thank you.
Thank you. Made it easy for you. You've been here all day.
Just as a reminder, we're past our 2-hour time limit, so.
Any updates on subcommittees?
I think we just covered everything for critical identification. Carol Holdhouse is not here. She asked me to make you all aware for the Public Education Subcommittee that we are, as an organization, doing a table tent at this lawn and garden summit. And so I think what she'll have to do is call a subcommittee meeting so that we can determine what materials we were needed. Originally, I think part of the goal was to get a volunteer list there, but now would be after the March 7th date. So, you know, one thing that maybe I think Terry could do, because you have the list of all of the community garden members, right? Maybe they would be interested. There is a listserv that about the March 7th date or whatever date it turns out to be. We could kind of see if we can get some volunteers from that group as well. And Missouri Naturalists, we now have a contact established, and they would probably do community service hours. So just need help with the booth, and then that's all I've got for both committees.
Just one suggestion, Councilmember Edens. Planning Parks, is that Deb? All of our, I did talk briefly to some of the folks that all did that mountain biking stuff that they came. They said they would be interested also to help us.
The mountain biking,
with
is it Gork? Are you talking about?
That group that came to the meeting, they said they'd be
Gork.
more than happy to get on their bikes and help us look at the trails as well.
Okay.
Or the
good to
creeks.
know. Thank you. And Rick, maybe you can talk more to Carol about your stream table demonstration. I put that in the email, but in case she forgets to reach
Yeah, I've
out.
got two sources, so the Conservation Commission may be better. The Corps, their stream table is more about putting structures in, but people I know that the MDC does, they have like houses and stuff, and you can watch the house float away down the stream and stuff, so.
Okay.
Any of the other committees have any other updates? Richard?
Yeah, and I'll make it fast. The two main sources of any significant money is going to be basically the federal EPA or the state DNR. And I've been continuing, and I started up again the 14th of this month, making contacts beyond that too. But in those two, some names have changed. On the federal, it's always been a Jennifer Ousley and one other. And the results, you know, but they said, well, they would look into it, and it was not real promising. Then when it came to the state, I was talking to especially John Johnson, and so and he was at a level I wasn't quite sure. I've gotten to know, and there's quite a few state agencies that are related, but the main one is the Soils and Water Department, Conservation Department. So what has happened is they're in the state, I've gone above, and I didn't ask, it went above John Johnson, and went up, I think, to a real heavy hitter called Colleen Meredith. And so then that led to other people. One thing led to another. So in summary, and then also, which is interesting, out of one that I added was a nature conservatory. I received a call, I called her first, a Barbara Sherry. She is a biologist, a very smart lady, and I listened to her for quite a while. She seems to be in contact with some of these people in the state. So this culminated in a large email that Colleen Meredith initiated, and it pulls in the federal and the state. And so she sent out an email that pulled in heavy hitters at both levels, and it was sent to me.
That's great.
And then I sent back an email further describing what we want to do in our situation. So, bottom line, I think now what we want to do in our existence now lies with, I think, most of all the heavy hitters at both the state and the federal level. And the federal level is the Region 7, which is in Lenexa, Kansas. And so that's where that lies right now. Now what comes out of that in terms of timing and money, we will see. So I thought that was a good development for those, especially for those two.
Thank you.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention that the planning department put together a great SharePoint website for us.
Yeah.
It's completely trivial. It shouldn't be intimidating because there's nothing to it. There is no learning curve, and it has documents out there already. John provided some, Rick provided some, just general, interesting stuff about stream bank stabilization and what other folks have done, and the plans from Creve Coeur and Maryland Heights are out there, and Kathy's putting a lot of other documentation out there, including all of the past agendas and all of the documentation packets that we've gotten to date. So I encourage you to use it if you have anything new to stick out there, if you have anything that's thought-provoking or interesting or helpful, generally stick it out there. And I think it'll be useful for us going forward. That's all I'm going to say.
Lauren, you may want to talk to the soil and water people. They may want to do something at the summit.
Yeah, that's a great idea.
Especially if we can get some of those pamphlets we have out at the summit. That would be great.
Kathy or Joe, do you guys need a motion for this to go forward, or are we good to go?
It's already out the door and in the
perfect.
home.
That's what I thought.
All right.
Just
Sorry.
making sure.
It's working, by the way, too. We
Yeah,
had a couple of surveys, I think 3 surveys completed, and a couple of phone calls. So,
Can I ask a quick question about these? Because I may have missed it. I'm assuming that the color, like the teal line and the dark blue line and the yellow line are different floodplains, is that correct?
Yes.
And then the dark blue line that kind of runs through the creek is where the creek theoretically should be?
The solid blue line is the main channel or tributary. The blue is the 100 years end, and the yellow is the 500.
So, looking at these, I think it's kind of interesting, but as those guys mentioned from MSD, like creeks move around. Is it possible, I don't even know where we would look, is it possible to figure out how much they're supposed to move around? Because like, at least one of these, it looks like the one off of Strecker behind Elegant Child, like that's clearly now out of any floodplain. Yeah, Clayton and Strecker. Like it's, so that's obviously a problem.
One of the things we talked about last time was to go back over the decades.
Right.
And take a look at the aerial photography.
But I'm like, like I'm pretty acquainted, like I know looking at it from the road, it looks bad in a lot of places, and it certainly is, but like, very clearly, this spot, the creek, is 100% out of any area that it's supposed to be.
Right.
So it should be, I would assume, measurement-wise, it should be pretty easy, I would think, to figure out, like, these things are supposed to move, I don't know, 50 feet one direction or the other.
They normally move from bluff to bluff.
Right.
They'll meander So it takes thousands of years to do that.
Right.
But obviously, they can no longer do this.
Right, and a few of these have moved quite a bit in 20 years. So I think it would be helpful if we had an idea of really how much those things are supposed to move, to be able to pinpoint where we should be looking. Because if they're moving like this, and clearly I'd be willing to put money, that spot behind Elegant Child is exactly where all that water drains out of, and that's why it looks that way. We can start addressing some of those things a lot faster. And, I mean, walking them is important, obviously. A lot of this stuff we can just see.
We can ask this directly as a specific question to Mark Print with somebody.
Yeah.
Kathy, do you need to take a vote on number 9? Or, sure.
I do want to mention, first of all, Gary put the aerial photography together, but on the one that represents Cox Creek, that second kind of meander just above Raleigh Park Drive, look at it in the older aerial photography, it was getting precariously close to Strecker Road. The city funded a repair there in the tune of over $1 million. And as you can see, it stabilized it and protected the road. So there is ways to fix these things, and the city's done it in the past. It's all a matter of funding. Right, Mr. Chairman?
Yes. And there's one back there that I told the story not long ago, that last tremendous storm, and it had the system that Dr. Hammer and Mike, I think, spoke of. And that system is in place in a certain spot back there. And other than where that occurs, the water was flowing at a high velocity. If my perception was close to being 20/20, when I looked at the water at that particular location, it was very slow. I mean, it was like it was almost stationary, but I'm sure it was moving. But that system sure appeared to me that it really slows the velocity.
I got one thing I'll offer back
Yes,
here.
quickly.
Before you even think about doing any bank erosion work, clean out the creek to take the pressure off the banks, because otherwise you'll just waste your time and effort with bank stabilization. Because the material in the creek, the gravel bars primarily, is what's causing a great part of the bank erosion.
Yeah, but you don't want to take it all out and make it a straight highway, which it goes faster than, so.
No, actually, according to permit regulations, you stay out of the pools, you take the gravel bar down to the water elevation or right above it. But that's, if you don't do that first, and you may find that your banks are just fine the way they are after doing that, perhaps.
Terry, do you have something?
I was just going to address Councilmember Farmer's question on this area here. You mentioned that it appears to be outside the floodplain. You have to keep in mind when you're looking at these that it is not an entirely accurate survey.
Right.
Okay. So if I would have turned on the contours, which are 4-foot intervals, it obviously would have made it so busy you wouldn't be able to see what you're looking at for the most part. But to get a truly accurate depiction of where, if that is out of its floodplain, it would have to be surveyed. But that's one of the important reasons why we have to narrow down what areas we have to focus on, because that costs money.
Right.
And back to Member Sturm. Okay, thank you.
I have one more on the next meeting date. There were a couple of members who couldn't make the next scheduled date on February 19th, so I sent an email asking you all to check your schedule, and I've heard from some, but I haven't heard from enough to assure a quorum in either one. So, I don't know if you want to do show of hands on who's available on the 26th, which is the preferred date at the moment, to ensure that we'd have a quorum, and if you want to make a motion to switch the schedule to February 26th from what was on the approved calendar of February 19th.
I think Joe responded.
I did.
I did.
February 26th would be okay with me.
Okay.
Yeah, me too.
Me too.
Okay.
Is anybody?
We now have more. So if you want to make a motion on to change it, that would be great.
I'll make a motion to change it.
Councilman Palmer, second by Councilman Remy.
Thank you.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstained? All right, thank you.
Motion to adjourn. Motion to
Oh,
adjourn.
I have one item.
Okay.
I've been very patient.
Yes.
One item.
I haven't heard enough about creek cleanup. That's an issue that's really important to us. We live on Questover Canyon that is right behind Farr's Nursery. And in the last 3 months since September, we've removed large stumps, large trees, and general wood debris that comes off of that big hill on the south side of T, and it washes into the culvert. It's the only way in and out of our subdivision. We have 2 6-foot culverts, and when the wood hits that, it stops. And we've removed enough wood that it would completely fill that center area of the tables since September. And I spent 4 hours last week with a 40-ton tow truck to pull one piece out, and he could barely get it out of there. And now we've got it out and we've got nothing to do with it. In the past, what we've done is cut things up into smaller pieces and put them back in the creek, but that doesn't help the downstream people. And it's a long way from Farr's Nursery to the Missouri River. So there's a lot of households there that this would impact. And it would seem to me that if we had a service that could come around and pick that stuff up and or pull it out of the creek, that would be most helpful to all the residents, for us, and everybody downstream also. And I hadn't heard any discussion on
I will
that.
ask Joe, how do we normally handle any of that? Or do we?
Well, if there's something threatening city infrastructure, we send out a crew to basically do exactly what the gentleman just described. We'll remove the blockage. If it's small enough, they'll haul it off. If it's not, they leave it in place. But
I called Omni Tree Service, and they have the right equipment to come do what I needed to do. And they gave me a price of $1,450 to load this onto a dumpster and take it away. And we're looking for some help with other subdivisions chipping in, or how we could get some help on this situation.
Almost like a co-op of private property owners.
It's an association.
Many groups.
Yeah, we have, there's
associations,
18
yeah.
3-acre lots, we have 13 homes back in this lot.
That's a private
we're
street.
bearing the brunt of all of
That's
it.
a private
The
street.
private street, the city can't do.
No,
it.
but what I meant is if
But
each of these subdivisions that are private formed their own co-op,
Yeah,
you could
they could
collect
do
and
that,
bargain.
but the city can't because it's private property.
I just wanted to verify that it was private.
Yeah, it is private.
Yeah, we had to say that we had a culvert actually get plugged up and collapse in our subdivision, and we spent $90,000 to replace the culvert pipes and the road over the top of it. Very expensive proposition.
We just put in a new bridge, and obviously we want to save that because we just spent a lot of money on it.
Right, I don't blame you. But unfortunately, when we all bought, because you live in Ward 1, or Ward 6, I think. When we bought out in the rural areas, we accepted that liability, and that's what we have to deal with.
Well, there's a lot of discussion about other things that would help Creek
Right.
It's
flow,
pertinent.
and this would help it, so I thought I'd bring it up.
Yeah, no, I mean, you guys are probably doing the right thing, but unfortunately, it's the monkey's on your back.
And we understand that, we accepted that, but it would seem that if the city had a large set of equipment that could go around and pick this up, that we would alleviate some of the situations downstream of Wild Horse Creek getting.
Is there any way they can contract with the city?
Getting pounded.
That's what I was thinking.
Better.
Maybe there's a way that the city would bid those services, get the economies of scales associated with the city and the guarantee of the work, and then instead of paying $1,450, maybe it's $400.
Sure.
And makes it more manageable for homeowners associations or individual property owners.
I got no problem with that.
I'll
Can you
explore
find out
that. With the permission of the task force, I'll pull that thread a little more.
Would you ask Eureka if that's what they did? There was an article that showed up, I think it was KSDK. The mayor was interviewed. They decided that a lot of the recent flooding was because culverts weren't cleaned out, and they organized a citywide cleanup. I don't know what they did with the private property. Maybe it would be interesting to know what they've done and if they found a solution, if they are billing out their services. And I can try to find that article and send it to you, but they recently did it, so if they have a procedure, I'd like to know what it was.
I'll follow up on that and let you all know what I find, and also I'll talk with the city attorney and see what his impression of maybe doing something like that.
Thank you for bringing that.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
Motion to adjourn.
Second by Garitano.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you.
Thank you all for coming tonight, we appreciate it. Thank you, sir.
Does anybody live in Ward 2?